seizure at sea that signals something bigger than oil. The interception of an oil tanker near Venezuela this week is not just another sanctions enforcement headline. It is a signal flare, one that illuminates how far Washington is now willing to go to choke off the economic lifelines of Nicolás Maduro's government, even at the risk of escalating maritime and diplomatic tensions. At the surface, the U.S. says it stopped a vessel carrying sanctioned Venezuelan oil. Beneath that claim lies a much broader strategy, turning financial pressure into physical enforcement and sanctions into something that increasingly resembles a naval containment operation. This is no longer abstract economic warfare. It is visible, muscular, and deliberately unsettling. Why this interception matters. For years, U.S. sanctions on Venezuela have relied on deterrence, warnings, blacklists, and legal risk. What happened off the Venezuelan coast marks a shift toward direct interdiction, even in international waters. That matters for three reasons. It raises the cost of doing business with Venezuela beyond paperwork and penalties. Shipping companies, insurers, and port operators now have to consider the risk of seizure, not just fines. It accelerates Venezuela's isolation faster than sanctions alone ever could. After previous tanker seizures, exports fell sharply, not because oil stopped flowing underground, but because ships stopped moving above water. It tests the limits of international maritime norms. Intercepting vessels that are not formally sanctioned or operating under foreign flags introduces legal gray zones that could reverberate far beyond Venezuela. This is pressure by presence, not just policy. The shadow fleet and the quiet oil war. Venezuela has survived sanctions by adapting. It relies on what analysts call a dark or shadow fleet, aging tankers, opaque ownership structures, flag switching, and ship-to-ship transfers designed to blur origins and destinations. This system is fragile. It depends on ambiguity, plausible deniability, and the assumption that enforcement stops short of physical confrontation. The U.S. interception challenges that assumption directly. Even if a tanker is not explicitly sanctioned, Washington is signaling that association, intent, and cargo origin may now be enough. That widens the enforcement net and terrifies logistics firms operating on thin margins. Maduro's response is predictable but telling. Caracas has labeled the seizure international piracy and vowed to raise the issue at the United Nations. That rhetoric is familiar. What's more telling is what Venezuela cannot easily counter: the sudden disappearance of willing carriers. Oil is Venezuela's economic bloodstream. When tankers stop sailing, revenues don't just fall, they collapse. That weakens the government's ability to pay soldiers, import fuel, and maintain internal stability. From Maduro's perspective, this is not just an oil dispute. It looks like regime pressure dressed as maritime law enforcement. And that perception matters because it shapes how Venezuela and its allies respond next. A risky line the U.S. is willing to walk. From Washington's view, this is about cutting off what it describes as illicit funding streams tied to narcotics trafficking and authoritarian governance. But the method carries risks. Intercepting vessels in international waters, especially those not formally sanctioned, opens the door to legal challenges from ship owners and flag states, retaliatory actions or harassment of commercial shipping elsewhere, precedent-setting behavior other powers may copy for their own geopolitical aims. In other words, today it's Venezuelan oil. Tomorrow, another country could justify similar actions under a different banner. The Chevron exception reveals the strategy. One revealing detail is what remains untouched: oil shipments authorized under U.S. licenses, including those involving American companies like Chevron. That distinction shows this is not an indiscriminate blockade. It is a controlled squeeze, cutting off unapproved flows while preserving leverage over approved ones. The message to Caracas is clear. Compliance opens narrow doors. Defiance closes entire sea lanes. What comes next? In the short term, Venezuelan exports are likely to remain depressed. Ships will wait, buyers will hesitate, insurance costs will rise. In the medium term, expect Venezuela to lean harder on non-Western partners, particularly Russia and Iran, to find alternative logistics routes, though those too carry sanctions risk. In the long term, this episode may reshape how sanctions are enforced globally. If physical interdiction becomes normalized, economic pressure will no longer be a background threat. It will sail alongside aircraft carriers. The bigger picture. This tanker interception is not about a single ship or a single cargo. It is about redefining enforcement power in a fragmented global order. The U.S. is betting that deterrence holds and escalation doesn't. Oil markets are watching, shipping firms are recalculating, and governments around the world are quietly asking the same question. If this is now possible here, where might it happen next? That question, more than any barrel of oil, is what gives this story its weight. Subscribe here for latest unbiased analysis.